Number 10. Dr. Murrow. The interesting thing too about Dr. Murrow is that some spelling for this character is like Dr. Morrow, but if you actually look at the comic itself, it's Murrow with a U, so I believe it's Murrow with a U, but if you say Morrow and I say Murrow, that's also fine. I'm not gonna come for you. Dr. Murrow appears in the What If issue number 11 from the 1997 series. Here we answer the question, what if the Marvel bullpen had been transformed into the Fantastic Four? Being from a different time period, there are definitely some extremely sexist tones in this issue. A lot of it aimed sadly at Fabulous Flo Steinberg, who stands in for Invisible Woman. But another ridiculous aspect of this issue, aside from that more serious one, are some of the villains that we see the bullpen version of the FF face off against. Like their first villain, Dr. Murrow. Dr. Murrow's island was the one that they planned on visiting before they were delivered some fan mail. Upon opening it up, they found a mysterious radio-like device which transformed them into the Fantastic Four, granting them powers after they were exposed to cosmic rays that the device emitted. Turns out that this was all part of a Skrull plot, which we find out later in the issue, and that Dr. Murrow was also a victim of a similar device. Oh no! But even with that, why did he attack them when they got to his island? Why is he a villain in all this? Why is he one of the first villains we run into? Did the transformation like make him, I don't know, just really mad or something? Or violent? The reality is they probably just wanted to start the issue off with a good fight and a bit of mystery, but still Murrow ends up being a pretty bizarre villain because of this. Because there's things that just aren't explained here. Oh well, I'm willing to come along for this strange ride in any What If. Number 9. Disappointed Loki. In the What If story, What If the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner, we get to see what would happen if the Hulk had kept Banner's wits and then ran into Loki's illusion, you know, with the train tracks and such. Turns out this version of the Hulk was too smart to fall for Loki's trap. Seeing the TNT on the train tracks, but believing it to be an illusion, meant that he would never be put onto a collision course with the Avengers and therefore would never join that team. Instead, Loki ends up disappointed, and Banner goes on to fight against Galactus, joining with Professor X and Reed Richards to create the new and extremely powerful uni-being of X-Man. Poor Loki though, he's like, but I set this trap in. Alright. I guess not all traps are winners. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show some support for us on other platforms, head on over to Facebook, give us a like, give us a follow, it does help us out, and we're gonna have lots of exciting new content coming for you over there. Exciting. Number 8. Fake Captain America. Both weird and great in a lot of ways. Fake Captain America was William Burnside. Now, while William Burnside does exist in the 616 universe, where he was a well-meaning Captain America imposter driven mad by improper use of the super soldier serum, in the What If reality of Earth 84444, he ended up becoming obsessed with communists, paranoid that they could be lurking around every corner, which is kind of what happened in the main continuity, but in this one, he's less like, oh no, it's just the super soldier serum, and more like he made some conscious choices here. Modeling America into less of a democracy under the name of Captain America, Burnside would be beaten back by the real Captain America, who in this story doesn't resurface until 1984, which means that Burnside has a lot of time to basically do harm to the American image and the influence of the nation's people. This warning story and the speech the real Cap gives at the end are both still pretty relevant today, which is why this is like a great issue, but also why it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird how there's a lot of stuff in this that I feel like is still relevant, even though it's from 1984. Do we ever do new things, or does history just cycle in like some vicious loop? Probably that. Number 7. Colonel Bruce Banner. What if Bruce Banner was actually the monster and Hulk was just purely the good guy? Well, that is the question we dive into in issue 91 of the 1989 series. Here, Bruce Banner mistreats his wife, Betty Ross, who eventually becomes, of course, Betty Banner. Bruce is cruel and unkind, but after he is involved in a gamma radiation explosion, another half of him emerges, a glowing green, light-like figure who is gentle and kind and we know as Starman. Basically, this world's Hulk. And he was actually terrified of Bruce himself. Not only is this villain pretty interesting, unique, and strange, but the story is also like epically sad. Despite Betty reaching out for help to both her father and others around her, it seems that no one actually really believes Betty when it comes to the fact that like Bruce mistreats her. In the end, she is confined to a mental institution as she's believed to have gone insane. But at least there she appears to be safe from Bruce and his cruelty, so It's like a sad, but I guess sort of happy ending. It's bittersweet is what it is. Ugh. Number 6, Mr. Fantastic. So, Mr. Fantastic in this story is still Reed Richards, but he's also Doctor Doom. Let me explain. In issue number 6 of the 1997 What If series, we get to explore an alternate world where the Fantastic Four were granted different powers. These powers seem to have been inspired more by their personality traits. As such, Reed Richards becomes a big brain. Literally, he's just a brain. Instead of him staying as a big disembodied brain though, with mental or psionic capacities, if you will, he ends up being convinced by Dr. Doom to go with him so that Doom might help him by using his knowledge of robotics to build him a humanoid body. You know that when Doom is like, please, let me help you, Reed Richards. That's not what's about to happen. In reality, Doom's plan is to use Reed's powerful brain form to power his time travel machine. The Fantastic Four come to save Reed and a battle ensues, eventually resulting in a massive explosion when Doom attempts to activate his machine. Just as the explosion goes off though, Reed manages to use his mental brain powers to move his mind into Doom's body. As a result, Doom, which I assume moves into Reed's brain form, ends up dead, and Reed lives on, but within the scarred body of Dr. Doom. So now it just looks like Doom is leading the FF. Pretty cool, but also pretty weird.
Coming in at our number 5 spot, these weird villains don't get any less weird. We have Emoticon Man. Another amazing creation by the super weird mind of Grant Morrison. His first appearance goes back to 2011 in Batman Incorporated number 6, where Wayne Enterprises' press conference is interrupted by a new villain and his gang. The villain being Emoticon Man. Both him and his gang members wore these crazy emoticon masks, and that was all they wore for their supervillain costumes. There's not much else to tell on this one, so, you know, he gets defeated and then after that, he was never seen again. I wonder why. At number 4, we have the worst villain to spell, but maybe the best one to say, onomatopoeia. Now, wait, Dewey, isn't that a literary term? Yeah, it is. And it's also a Batman villain, because why the heck not? Let's make something original, even if it does sound really lame. Onomatopoeia is a serial killer with no superpowers, so guess which kind of heroes he goes after? Heroes with no powers, such as Batman. Back in 2002 in Green Arrow number 12, we meet Onomatopoeia for the very first time after he stalks and murders the heroine, Virago. He is named this because he only speaks in onomatopoeias, such as BAM! Woof! Wham! You get the picture. He goes up against Batman a few times and needless to say, obviously gets his butt kicked, but one interesting fact is that this character was actually created by the famous writer/director, Kevin Smith. Kevin, you are wicked awesome. Don't you think you could have come up with a little bit of a better villain than this? I mean, maybe he was still reeling from his loss of the Superman movie that he had going on with Nick Cage from years before, but you know, if that's the case, I'll give him a pass on this one, but seriously. Dude. Starting us off at number 3 is Calendar Man. Any of you gamers out there might remember this villain from the famous games Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. But this villain's first appearance actually goes back to 1958 in Bill Finger's Detective Comics number 258. As a child, Julian Day's father promised he would be back home for the holidays. He waited for his father from Christmas Eve to New Year's Day outside until finally police took him in. He was almost dead from exposure, by the way. From then on out, along with that terrible memory and a terrible relationship with his mother, that began the long and soon-to-be new life of the Calendar Man. So, what's this guy's deal? Well, he will only commit crimes on holidays, such as Christmas, New Year's, you name it. This guy started off really lame, but he was one of the lucky weird ones who got a revamp in the 1996 storyline, The Long Halloween, where he was quite the maniacal evil villain. As we all know, the holidays can be a tough time for a lot of people. We don't need any more stresses or problems than what we already have. So, this guy might just be the evilest villain on our list yet. Either way, I think I'm gonna start calling that one, family member at all the events Calendar Man, because they'll never really know that I'm talking about them. Maybe you guys could use it too. At our number 2 spot, we have the villain from the infamous TV show Polka Dot Door, also named Polka Dot Man. I'm just kidding. He's actually from Batman, and there's probably a lot of you out there that have no idea what I'm talking about, and that was a wasted reference, but that's okay. Nevertheless, Polka Dot Man is a weird Batman villain. First appearing in Detective Comics number 300 back in 1962, we meet the bizarre Polka Dot Man. The man who dresses in a suit with polka dots all over him. But wait, it's not just because the look is highly fashionable, because it isn't. Because these dots can detach from his suit and be used as weapons on the talented dynamic duo. Some of these polka dots can even be used as a teleporter for moments when he is a major loser and needs to bail out of a fight. Yeah, that's right, polka dot guy, I called you a loser. What are you gonna do about it? Teleport out of here? Okay, I will go easy on him. After all, he was created in the 60s, and that was a very fun time, to say the least. So it kind of makes sense. No matter what though, this is a very strange villain, and I think it'd be hilarious to see him brought back into the fold. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot and the most likely supervillain for me to be ever cast as, Johnny Karaoke. First appearing way back in 2007's Batman number 660, we meet Johnny Karaoke, a man raised in Southern California before he attended UCLA for business administration. And then he put his education to good use in the American arm of the Yakuza. I will add, he was fairly successful. However, Johnny and his geisha girls break into Omni-Med headquarters, but is defeated by Batman before he escapes and then is later killed by a villain Grotesque. Johnny Karaoke dies by getting shot in the head just after singing his last tune into his skull-topped cane/sword. And with that, that is the end of Johnny Karaoke and the top 10 weirdest Batman villains on the list. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-da-ba. I'll leave the singing to Johnny Karaoke. Some of these were absolutely hilarious, and I can't imagine anyone ever coming up with any of these guys, and some of these were just quite lame. But lucky for me, I love a good lame pun, song, or even quirky costume. So I really do hope I see the resurgence of these villains in the comics or even on the big screen. Maybe I could actually play Johnny Karaoke. My opening line? Here's Johnny! Okay.
LeapFrog. This spring-loaded villain appears in the What If that has Aunt May gaining Spider-Man's powers instead of Peter Parker. And before you jump down my throat, LeapFrog does appear in other comics first, I know this, actually first showing up in Daredevil number 25, but this iteration of the character is clearly meant to be more slapstick and ridiculous than he normally is, which is saying a lot, considering this must be one of the silliest villains in Marvel. But case in point, his first appearance in this What If issue shows him crashing through a brick wall and just swearing at everybody, screaming expletives as he bounces past a group of civilians and a news reporter. He ends up in a battle with Aunt May's Spider-Woman and gets thwarted by nothing other than a stretchy mass of dough that Aunt May uses to lasso him into a tree. He's just clearly such a dumb villain and appears for what I could only imagine was comedic value to the already hysterical What If issue.
Number 9. Ghost Grandpa. While technically Ghost Riders are supposed to be heroes, this one doesn't seem to be too nice in terms of the brief glimpse that we see of him. And it's because of that I decided to include him as a kind of like a low-key villain. Ghost Grandpa makes his appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34, where we ask the question, what if Ghost Rider had possessed someone else? Instead of Johnny Blaze, of course. The answer allows us to take a look at a few different candidates, including Ghost Skater and Ghost Baby, but while both talk about punishing evildoers and getting vengeance, Ghost Grandpa only seems to be interested in getting revenge on his nurse for delaying his glass of warm milk.
Number 8 is Wolverine Lord of Vampires. This villain is bizarre because it's the embodiment of a character we've all known forever, but who doesn't really exhibit any of his typical traits. In What If number 24, Wolverine takes on the Lord of Vampires, who tries to bite him to turn Wolverine into a vampire himself. And since Wolverine was too badass to simply be turned into a vampire, he decides it's only in his character to kill the guy. And he does, but what happens when you kill the Lord of Vampires is that you take on the title yourself. And this is when Wolverine starts to change into a very strange version of himself. Right away, Wolverine starts turning his former friends into vampires, with his demeanor totally shifting as he uses like mind control powers on them, which is just pretty strange on its own. Honestly, this is what it is. It's just weird seeing Wolverine without any level of humanity in him anymore. Something about this transformation doesn't seem right and gives me some very conflicting feelings towards the whole thing. Although I gotta say, he does turn out to be pretty powerful Lord of Vampires. He even takes out Doctor Strange in a harrowing battle, which says a lot for Wolverine on its own. This suggests that his power level is pretty heavily increased after getting the title of Lord of Vampires. Doesn't change the pop collar and bat-eared hairdo though. This is a list about weird villains, not powerful ones. Although he might end up on both, he still ranks on this one for sure. I mean, just look at him.
Number 7. Megynito. Megynito appears in a humor issue of What If. She's the one who terrorizes poor old styrofoam skeleton Wolverine. She's technically supposed to be the female child version of Magneto, who is known in the comics for ripping the adamantium out of Wolverine over the course of a few horrifying panels of comics. Megynito, on the other hand, doesn't need any powers to hurt her version of Wolverine, who is much more cowardly in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. Which, I mean, makes sense considering he literally has a styrofoam skeleton. I mean, I would be afraid of Megynito too, if I had a styrofoam skeleton. Also, just in general, she seems like a mean little girl.
Danger. This villain is definitely a weird one. It's basically just the humanoid form of the Danger Room, a highly sophisticated computer interface that the X-Men used to train. But in 2009's astonishing X-Men number 9, the Danger Room comes to life and takes on a humanoid form that calls itself Danger. Although I know this isn't a what if issue, in 2010's What If Astonishing X-Men number 1, Danger gets a more focused storyline and it's even weirder than you might expect. Basically, Ultron somehow catches wind that Danger has come to life and falls in love with her. They become a couple and go on a murder spree, killing all the X-Men and then eventually Professor X himself. Then they take to the cosmos and continue to kill all the organic life forms in their path, until they finally establish their own intergalactic empire. It's later pondered by the Watcher that if Professor X had only listened to Danger when she declared that she had gained sentience, she wouldn't have been so inclined to take him down. It's sort of a cool message about the dangers of AI, but first and foremost, it's just a weird antagonist in this what if issue. The Danger Room gets married to Ultron. It doesn't get much weirder than that, I don't think.
Number 5, Raquel. I never know how to say this name. Raquel isn't a strange cosmic villain in the sense of her appearance or role, but more is mentioned here because she suddenly popped up in the comics after years of being dead, which is what makes her kinda weird. It had been so long that her return was mostly met with confusion from fans at that point because many who were reading her reappearance didn't actually know who the heck she was. Even I had to do some digging to fully understand the importance of just who this character is. Raquel was once one of the rulers of the Skrull Empire. Unlike Veronki, who was made queen after the Skrulls' homeworld fell, and actually who a lot of people thought I think Raquel was at first, Raquel was actually the Skrull Empress, back when the homeworld was still around and doing well. Raquel first appeared back in 1979 and would perish in the comics in issue 257 of Fantastic Four in 1983, only a few short years later. She returned only a few short years ago from now though, so like it's 2023 now. I think she reappeared back in like 2020 or something like that, or 2021 in the Empire event, where she was revealed to be Hulkling's grandmother who survived the destruction of Tarnax 4, and who had been working behind the scenes ever since undercover as a Kree pursuer while putting into motion a plan to make her grandson ruler of the United Skrull and Kree empires. Which is like, what? That was me when I found all that out. Number 4, Nihilus. Nihilus is weird in the most comic book way for a villain. He hails from the Negative Zone and is also insectoid in appearance, like so many others on our list. Nihilus basically has a cosmic magic wand, if you will, known as the Cosmic Control Rod, that he used in his attempt to take over the Negative Zone. In more recent appearances, however, Nihilus actually usually chooses to wear this rod as sort of a protective accessory, using it to protect him against naturally occurring dangers such as aging, heat, and cold, in addition to gaining the ability to fly through space. I mean, at the end of the day, Nihilus is like kind of an insect, so he needs to be protected against those things. He also initially became a villain of the Fantastic Four because they borrowed the Cosmic Rod to help treat the Invisible Woman during her pregnancy. Though admittedly, they did return the Cosmic Rod, so I don't know why Nihilus is so angry. I guess if you need something to live though, you'd be like, hey, don't just take that. Number 3, Galactus. When you think about it, Galactus is a pretty weird villain. He's basically a giant man who can fly through the vacuum of space, although he usually prefers to do so from within his own even more enormous spaceship, because I guess he likes having his things with him, who wears a very large hat, has much hunger, and as a result, basically eats planets. Oh, and he's also basically a universal constant, meaning that without his existence, the universe is kind of thrown off balance. Despite being an antagonist, you also kind of need him to exist, or at least, I mean, you used to need him. I don't really know what's happening with that. Recently, Galactus got dusted in a fight involving the Black Winter and Thor, and the universe still seems to be existing without too much disruption right now. But even that is weird, because if we established how Galactus is basically a necessary evil earlier, you'd think his death would cause things to get pretty wonky pretty quickly. Although, to be fair to Donny Cates' current Thor series, that's likely coming in due time, because it was kind of hinted at that, yeah, killing Galactus may have been a bad move. Number 2, Impossible Man. Impossible Man is one of my all-time favorite weirdos from the cosmic realm of Marvel Comics. He's kind of like Marvel's equivalent of DC's fifth-dimensional imp, Mr. Mixopitalic. Impossible Man hails from the planet Pop-Up and is known as a Pop-Upian. He is often depicted as being more a misguided villain than a malicious one. For the most part, he gets into trouble with heroes because of a misunderstanding or because of kind of his love for pranking. Like Mr. Mixie, he is sometimes an ally to the heroes who he has also been known to torment, and is known for being pretty intensely powerful, I'd say, having molecular manipulation powers which allow him to change his form, shapeshift, and even duplicate himself. Also, he's got a very goofy design that honestly reminds me of a cross between Mr. Mixie and the Coneheads, and I love it. Number 1. Zemnu. Definitely one of the weirdest weirdos out there for me. Even his name sounds so cosmically weird and fantastic. Zemnu. Reminds me of Xanadu, although not at all related to that 80s Olivia Newton-John fantasy musical classic, to clarify. Sadly, I wish Zemnu was Xanadu themed villain. What would that even be like? I don't know. I'm here for it. Zemnu with like some roller skates on. Zemnu is a Hulk villain. He was an alien cyborg prisoner who escaped from exile only to crash land on Earth. Already that sounds pretty wild. But hey, it gets weirder. Zemnu initially hoped to control the minds of the people of Earth and get them to build him a new spaceship, one that was so powerful that its launch would actually in essence destroy Earth. Zemnu is a psionic being who can hypnotize his victims and control their minds. He can also use hosts to kinda heal himself, in essence transforming their body into his until there's nothing resembling them or their mind left. Even stranger, Zemnu was technically the first character to be known as the Hulk before the creation of the Bruce Banner turned green giant version of the character, which is even weirder to think about. Zemnu's OG Hulk.
Number 10. The Hood. He dropped out of school and took up a life of crime in an attempt to provide for his mother. One night, while attempting to rob a warehouse, he was attacked by a cloaked demon who he shot, seemingly to death. Robbins decided to take a souvenir and stole the demon's boots and cloak. He soon found that the demonic clothing gave him supernatural powers, and he became the supervillain known as the Hood. He managed to use these powers to create a criminal empire, while all the heroes were busy fighting each other during the Civil War. The cloak's powers turned out to be from the demon Dormammu, who used the Hood in his plans to kill Doctor Strange, which all failed. The Hood tangled with several heroes, including Professor X and the Red Hulk, before eventually being defeated by Hawkeye, who made a deal with Count Nefaria to take away the Hood's powers. The Hood became obsessed with getting his powers back, eventually taking a comatose Spider-Man hostage in an effort to force Black Cat to get him his cloak back. This backfired when the cloak the Black Cat gave him turned out to actually be a demon bag, which ate Robbins, bringing his criminal career to a close. Number 9. Hammerhead. A former mob hitman whose skull was shattered in a brawl, Hammerhead's skull was reinforced with a steel alloy plate, which he uses to crash through walls and headbutt Spider-Man. As if that wasn't odd enough, because the last thing he saw before getting his head smashed in was a poster for a 20s gangster film, Hammerhead has taken on the persona of a 20s gangster. He first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 114, where he was involved in a gang war with Dr. Octopus. Hammerhead continued to tangle with Spider-Man for years, eventually having his brain transferred into a robotic adamantium skeleton by Mr. Negative. Number 8. Typhoid Mary. So this character's origin may be a bit triggering for victims of so if that's you, please feel free to skip ahead to the next entry. Okay, so as a child, Mary Walker was continuously SA'd by her father. This caused her to develop a secondary persona named Typhoid, who could defend her from her father. This persona had mutant powers such as telekinesis, telepathy, and most notably, pyrokinesis, the ability to control fire. The meek and mild Mary was put in an institution, but was later broken out by Typhoid. She worked as an actress for a time before eventually working in a masked Matt Murdock eventually came to the to confront a criminal, but was attacked by the women who were working there. In the ensuing fight, Mary was accidentally pushed out the window and was presumed dead by the other women and Murdock. She survived the fall, but developed another alter named Bloody Mary, who vowed to never be hurt by a man again. Typhoid Mary has spent the years since struggling for control with her various alters and working as a gun for hire for criminals such as the Kingpin. She has developed additional alters over the years, such as Walker, who functions somewhat as a moderator between the alters, and Mutant Zero, an operative working for the Initiative. Number 7. Great White Shark. Warren White was the Bernie Madoff of Gotham City, embezzling millions of dollars and destroying the pension funds of several of its inhabitants. Nicknamed the Great White Shark, Warren thought he had gotten off easy when he used his money and influence to cop an insanity plea, and was placed in a mental institution rather than a prison. Unfortunately for him, that mental institution was Arkham Asylum. Warren was considered the new fish in the asylum, and quickly became the punching bag for all the inmates. The stress of this eventually began to drive him insane. This culminated when Jane Doe locked him in Mr. Freeze's cell, causing him to be disfigured by frostbite. His skin was turned a pale shade of white. He lost a few fingers, his ears, his nose, his hair, and his lips. Deciding in his madness to lean into the gimmick, White filed his teeth to sharp points and embraced the identity of the Great White Shark. When Arkham was taken over by demons, Shark realized that he would likely go to hell when he died. So he made a deal with the demons that when he did go to hell, he would be spared the suffering and would instead get to torture all the inmates in the asylum who had made his life a living hell. He became one of Gotham's most notorious crime bosses, running his operations from his cell in Arkham in order to avoid suspicion. Number 6. Absorbing Man. After the death of his mother, Carl Creel's father became abusive towards him, eventually kicking him out to live on the street when he eventually tried to fight back. In order to survive, Creel engaged in petty theft to support himself while building his career as a boxer. He found some success in this field, and in an interesting turn of fate, was actually the boxer that Daredevil's father, Batlin Jack Murdoch, was supposed to lose to in a fixed boxing match. Murdoch refused to throw the fight, defeated Crusher, and as a result, was killed on the orders of the criminal the Fixer. Creel eventually became an enforcer for the Owl before eventually being arrested. While serving his sentence, he was chosen by Loki to be a pawn in one of his schemes against Thor. Loki spiked the inmate's water with Asgardian herbs that granted him the power to absorb the properties of any element he touched. He used his powers to absorb the powers and properties of Mjolnir, Thor's magical hammer, and was able to successfully take on the God of Thunder, although he was eventually defeated in a rematch.
Number 5. Emperor Joker. Mr. Mixopitalic has an extreme level of power, like I said. Also, like I said, if this power fell into the wrong hands, it could be potentially reality ending. Now, what hands could be worse than the psychotic hands of Batman's arch nemesis, the Joker? Well, that's exactly who gets the power in the Emperor Joker storyline. Mr. Mix gets bored and wants to give Joker 1% of his power, just to see the tricks Joker is able to pull off. But instead, the Joker tricks Mr. Mixopitalic into giving him 99.9% of his power instead. Joker uses this power to rewrite all of reality to become his sick, twisted dream world. He eats the whole population of China out of a Chinese food container box. He keeps everyone stuck in a time loop, including Batman, who he introduces to the afterlife over and over every day forever. Oh, and he also turned Flash into a slow-moving Abyss Man. Superman, the Spectre, and Mr. Mixopitalic, being the only ones who can remember the former world, tried to do something about this all-powerful Joker. But that's just the problem. He is all-powerful. He destroys all of reality, but he can't bring himself to destroy Batman fully. And because of this, he loses control of his power, allowing the Spectre and Mr. Mix to steal it back and fix all of reality. This story it's pretty nuts. Number 4. Condiment King. When the villainous Condiment King came on the scene, it was literally on the scene, as he appeared in the animated Batman TV show from 1992. One of the best, honestly. Condiment King was Buddy Stantler, a comedian who was brainwashed by the Joker into becoming a villain who wields condiment squirters and viciously horrible puns. I knew you'd catch up to me sooner or later. How I've relished this meeting. Come, Batman, let's see if you can cut the mustard. Diabolical stuff like that. The puns get even worse in the comics, with his real name becoming a pun on its own. Mitchell Mayo. He isn't taken seriously by anyone. His weapons don't actually project his condiments at a speed fast enough to do anyone harm, but they sure are inconvenient, leaving nasty stains in your superhero costume. On the other hand, he does potentially have the ability to be able to cause anaphylactic shock if he is battling someone with an allergy, right? Number 3. Monsieur Mallah and the Brain. Monsieur Mallah is described in his wiki as a militant, super intelligent French gorilla. The Brain, on the other hand, is described as a genius French scientist and master criminal who exists as a disembodied brain. So, those two descriptions are interesting enough on their own, but when I tell you the French militant gorilla and the disembodied brain are an item together, I think that just elevates the whole thing to a different level. Together, they are the primary leaders of the Brotherhood of Evil, who were villains to both the Doom Patrol and the Teen Titans. They both appeared in Doom Patrol 86 in 1964. Now, Brain was once a scientist who experimented on the gorilla who would become Mala, which would increase Mala's intelligence. An accident injured Ernst, and Mala had to remove Ernst's brain and place it in a technological holding thingamajig to keep him alive and be able to communicate. The two are almost always together, with Mala carrying around the brain. Hey, look, I don't judge. You find love where you find love, but as a concept for supervillains who lead a team of supervillains, you gotta admit it's pretty odd to say the least. Number 2, Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man. Let me repeat that for all those in the back who may not have heard. Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man. I don't really have a problem with 2/3 of that. I just get really hung up on the vegetable part. Is that weird? Sven Larsson is the man who claims that title. And while it is a completely ridiculous one, it is actually pretty fitting. Sven fell victim to an experiment of his own making, which allows him to transform into any animal, vegetable, or mineral, either partially or fully, although he very obviously likes to do a bit of all three at the same time, which is an odd choice, but hey, I just work here. Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man first appeared in Doom Patrol 89 in August 1964, and he is an enemy to the team, which makes sense given their weirdness. But Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man here has a vendetta against the Doom Patrol's leader, the Chief, who he believed once stole an invention of his. An invention that, funnily enough, is the only way of stopping Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man. But he didn't even do that, so no. Look, it gets weirder and weirder, but I gotta move on. Before I do though, Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to get out of my system one more time. Number 1, Mr. Mind. I think anyone who hasn't heard of this villain before would be forgiven. When you think of the most fearsome villains, specifically the villains of Captain Marvel, otherwise known as Shazam, you may not first think about the 7-inch long sentient worm from Venus known as Mr. Mind. This diabolically evil mind-controlling worm, after the events of Infinite Crisis, would cocoon himself and then emerge as a massive monstrosity capable of manipulating reality, consuming universes, and traveling through time and space. He was described as eating years and events from this universe's history, altering the Earth with every flap of his wings. It took a combined effort from Booster Gold, Supernova, and Skeets to defeat Mr. Mind by trapping him inside Skeets' shell, which was fortified by the Suspendium. Then, Booster Gold threw Skeets through time with the help of Supernova to the day he was first discovered on Earth by Dr. Sivana, and then he is trapped in a time loop forever. So they didn't even actually end up ending him. They just trapped him. This all-powerful mind-controlling 7-inch long worm.
Starting us off at our top 10 is a villain known as Bootface, a guy who takes off his boot and puts it in your face. Well, not really, that would just be stupid. Kind of like his name. In Peter Tomasi's Batman and Robin Volume 2, number 23.1, TwoFace, we see the death of this weird character. Bootface is a minion of the villain Terminus and only appears in 12 issues. His first one being Batman and Robin Volume 2, number 10. His exact origin is still unknown, but the reason why he is called Bootface is because during a prior battle with Batman, Bootface tries to burn Batman with a flamethrower. And of course Batman kicks him in his face, leaving a mean-looking boot print permanently in his face, thus giving him the name Bootface. I should also mention that Bootface has no powers whatsoever. He's just another bully looking to try and hang with the cool kids. So yeah, this is a weird one and maybe even a villain that was never even needed, but I'm sure as a writer it's fun making up dumb names every now and then. But don't worry, the fun doesn't stop here. At our number 9 spot, we have the terrifying and gruesome Flamingo. First appearing in Batman number 666, ooh, that's a nice number. Written by Grant Morrison, we meet Eduardo Flamingo, who was just an ordinary man until he got caught up with the mob. The mob then brainwashed him and also turned him into a serial killer who eats the faces of his victims. Flamingo sounds pretty dangerous, but doesn't really dress like it. He wears all pink and rides a pink motorcycle, and is also always seen with his whip. He famously almost killed Red Hood before Batman and Robin came to his rescue, but just after that, he did shoot Robin in the back 5 times at point blank range. Making sure his punishment was indeed painful for his attack, Scarlet slashed the right side of Flamingo's face and then was hit by Jason Todd by a bulldozer, and then Red Hood dropped a huge mass of rubble onto him too. It appears that he is killed, but there is no body that is ever actually found. This guy might not seem like he is deadly or lethal at first glance, but I guarantee you he is quite the match. The only category he doesn't beat Batman in is his style, because damn, Flamingo is fly. Moving on. At our number 8 spot, we have Dr. Freak. First appearing in Batman Legends of the Dark Knight number 91, written by Garth Ennis, we meet Dr. Freak, a former Vietnam soldier who creates a powerful drug known as DCS-2000. Sounds pretty cool, right? No, it doesn't. Stay in school, kids. DCS-2000 is a super powerful version of... What does he do with his victims after he kills them? Well, he enjoys bathing in their blood, because that's what every other hippie would do in the world, right? I highly doubt it. Get it? Anyway, this character sounds like a great character that was probably made in the 60s, right? Nope. Garth Ennis wrote this character just as recently as 1997, making this villain even weirder than originally thought. At number 7, we have the sauciest villain of them all, the Condiment King. First appearing in the TV show Batman the Animated Series in an episode aptly named Make 'em Laugh, we find a series of comedians who are abducted and brainwashed by the Mad Hatter, and then are turned into the most mediocre of criminals. Mediocre is definitely correct, because Condiment King's crimes consist of him shooting ketchup, mustard, and other condiments at his enemies while making terrible condiment puns all at the same time. Please excuse me as I relish in the greatness of that idea. This is another villain that sounds like he would fit in perfectly in the 60s, but of course this TV series ran in the early 2000s, with his debut in 2002. Sadly, he was killed later in an episode in 2009, and that was the last of our precious Condiment King. We shall miss you, oh great one. Rest in cheese. At number 6, we have the Calculator. At the age of 5, Noah Cutler was locked in a cage by his mother and would not be let out until he solved the Rubik's Cube. No wonder this guy grew up to be an incredibly intelligent supervillain. In Detective Comics number 463, we meet the terrifying Calculator, a villain from the 1970s comic series who would go across the country committing multiple crimes and would purposefully get caught by his enemies. Why? So he could press a magic button on his chest that would prevent the same hero from ever catching him again. In his first issue, we see him square off against the DC superhero The Atom for stealing a quake-breaking device from one of Ray Palmer's colleagues at the cost of a man's life. I don't think this weapon really worked too well, as he is recorded as having been defeated by many of the DC superheroes, including the Atom himself. And fortunately for him and all of us, he is no longer out in the field, but is now operating behind the scenes as an information broker for the criminal underworld, which I can only guess his desk is covered in Rubik's Cubes.
Number 5, Ruby Thursday. Ruby Thursday is a super weird villain who I still can't even really believe to this day actually exists. But she does. I believe she was kind of designed as a character on a dare, but don't quote me on that story, as it's just something I remember reading somewhere. I didn't have time to go back and double check all that, but I'm pretty sure her creation story is something like someone dared someone to create a thing. It's a good story if you want to go check it out. Her creation is credited to Steve Gerber and Sal Buscema, and she first appeared in Defenders issue 32 in the 70s. Her whole thing is that she is a sexy villain lady, but in the place of where her head should be, she instead has a big red ball that is made up of organic circuitry and thereby gives her powers, while also acting as a stand-in head, because you still need the head to do things, so yeah. Number 4, Spook. A villain I love to talk about, but whom no one really seems to remember apparently. Val Caliban was a master escape artist who first appeared in Detective Comics back in the 70s. He was initially caught and long thought to be dead after being executed, or at least we thought he was executed, appearing in an almost ghost-inspired robe of a costume. In reality, Caliban had survived using his skills of hypnosis and escapism. He was also privy to the architectural plans of the prison as he'd worked to help design it. Thereby, he was able to exploit that knowledge and use it to escape. Honestly, it was pretty silly of them to try to put him in a prison that he'd designed, in my opinion. Years later though, he wouldn't be so lucky when changes had been made to its design and he ended up back in the prison again. And he'd be even more unlucky when he ran into Damian Wayne. It's Damian Wayne. Number 3, Gaggy. Gaggy was the sidekick of Joker. Before there was Harley Quinn, there was Gaggy. Although to be clear, Joker and Gaggy were not in a romantic relationship. Just thought I'd point that out. They were simply partners in crime. In fact, when Harley did start coming around, it was later revealed that Gaggy actually became jealous of her, and even that she was perhaps the reason for Gaggy's fall from glory in the Joker's eyes. At least that was how Gaggy saw it. He basically blamed Harley for all of it. More recently, Gaggy made a reappearance in the Batman 3 Jokers limited series, but Sadly, he was killed off in that book, being eaten by a Joker shark. R.I.P. Gaggy. I love how Gaggy came back and then they were like, he's dead. I was like, oh, okay. Bye. Number 2. Tatterdemalion. Tatterdemalion is by all accounts a pretty weird and obscure villain who at one point was stopped by Dazzler. He doesn't really have any powers but instead has some kind of forgotten skills, possibly. He started out initially as a tap dancer who found fame in the movies with his dancing partner Julia Walker. Knowing eventually his star would dim, he invested money in a casino in Las Vegas, but later, after he retired to run it, was swindled out of his investment and money by criminals. Following that, he became a derelict and ended up allied with the committee. He eventually would become the crazed criminal Tatterdemalion, who sought to destroy money and material possessions as a means of revenge for what had unfairly happened to him. Honestly, it seems pretty fair of him to go that route. Eventually, Daz stopped him and helped to reunite him with his former dance partner, Julia Walker, but eventually she would grow tired of looking after him. Which also, fair. Number 1. Snowflame. Snowflame was originally a villain that first appeared in the 80s in DC Comics, making his first appearance in New Guardians issue number 2, and coincidentally, his last appearance as well, in the New Earth continuity anyways. Snowflame's powers are fueled by drugs, which grant him superhuman speed, strength, pyrokinesis, and made him numb to pain. He could also infect other people, intoxicating them merely by touching them. And guess what? There's more. It gets better. In 2020, he actually made a return in the Prime Earth continuity, appearing in the 2018 Catwoman series in issue number 23. So while he still remains obscure, he's also kind of recently renew as well. Yay. Number 10. Cordyceps Jones. Cordyceps Jones is one of my favorites of the cosmic villains mentioned on this list. He is definitely a super weirdo. Basically a mushroomy looking space mobster who is made up of fungal spores. While he might sound ridiculous, he is not a villain that you want to underestimate, trust me. He both looks and is terrifying, most recently using one of his casinos to threaten the existence of the entire planet of Earth by creating a betting pool based around its destruction. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like? Number 9. The Brood. Despite being a bunch of insectoid alien critters, the Brood are actually among one of the most normal of the weirdos on our list. They kinda resemble the monstrous species we see in Alien, and likewise, they are usually known for bursting through people's stomachs. The Brood also seek out hosts to incubate their young, which then of course burst out of the host's bodies to be born. Pretty much just like we see happen in Alien. Something interesting and bizarre that we know about the Brood too is that they don't just do this for survival's sake because, you know, it's required for them to continue to exist as a species. They actually enjoy terrorizing others throughout the cosmos. Inflicting pain and causing panic is something pretty much all Brood enjoy, giving them actual gratification from the violent acts that they commit. In fact, in their race, it's actually weird to feel a sense of empathy or compassion for others and to not enjoy pain, which is why Brood was ostracized and left to die by the Brood Queen, before he was then found and taken in by the X-Men. And weirdly, in his case, the ability to be friendly and kind is actually like his mutant power as a Brood, because, I mean, that is a mutation. Number 8. The Phalanx. Phalanx are some of the most freaky of the villainous cosmic alien races we have over at Marvel Comics. They are believed to have been created by the Technarchy, but I don't think they have actually been made aware of this connection, probably because the Technarchy doesn't want them to know that. Like the Borg, who likely inspired them, they are a cybernetic race focused on assimilating other worlds. They don't take you to a cube to experiment on you though, but instead infect you with the techno-organic virus, which then slowly changes you into a cyborg, erasing everything within you that is organic and turning you techno-organic, some might say. Number 7. Dark Celestials. So weird. Because when you think about it, the Celestials and even the Dark Celestials actually are a big part of the reason that we even have life on Earth in Marvel Comics. In fact, their existence could even be used to explain the sheer number of superpowered beings that are on Earth as well. The Progenitor, who appeared in AXE Judgment Day after being resurrected by the Avengers and Eternals, is actually the first to have become corrupted. Dark Celestials are just Celestials, godlike cosmic beings, who are corrupted by the Horde. The Progenitor did initially not turn dark, but instead died as a result of this, falling to planet Earth billions of years ago. The Celestial who searched for the Progenitor became corrupted by the corpse they found, and then they were turned dark, thereby creating the Dark Celestials, and actually becoming the first Dark Celestial, but not the first person to be infected by the Horde. Number 6. Horde. The Horde are another insectoid alien race that are so cosmic, it actually hurts me. They're basically the race that is meant to cosmically balance out the Celestials. They are agents of the Fulcrum, along with the Celestials and Watchers. And the Fulcrum, for those who are not familiar with this term, basically represents the balance of the cosmos. In essence, Marvel's God. The Fulcrum is actually known by another name that many may more commonly recognize from Marvel Comics, the One Above All. Yeah, so like I said, basically God. The Horde are therefore just made to be a force of destruction to counter the Celestials' force of creation in the universe. Why do they look like insects? Probably because it's just creepier that way. Why did they choose to corrupt the Celestials? Because they could. I'm not really sure how all that factors into Fulcrum's plans, or if it does at all, but it's a thing that happened at least, so hey, there's that. Number 5. Thanos. Another one of my favorites has to come from the What If Disney Plus streaming show, where we actually got to see what Thanos would be like if he were on the side of good. So technically here, I guess he's a hero, but of course in the main continuity we know him better as a villain, both in the comics and the MCU, so yeah. Thanos ends up joining the Ravagers and becoming a close ally of Star-Lord in episode 2 of the show, where we get to explore what the world would be like if T'Challa, instead of Peter Quill, ended up as Star-Lord. And guess what? Turns out the world would potentially be a lot better for it, minus the imminent doom of the universe as a result of Ego's plot to kind of like take it over, but ignoring that. Other than that, it was doing pretty well for itself, I gotta say. Thanos didn't even snap half the universe out of existence in this reality, and all because T'Challa convinced him not to do so by simply talking him down. Man, where was Black Panther when that was happening before? Why didn't he just come in and be like, hey look, Thanos, no. Maybe he's got to travel in space before he can have those conversational skills, maybe that's why?
At number 4 is Cable. So in this 2-part What If issue, Cable is the bad guy and he actually kills his parents, Cyclops and Jean Grey, as well as Professor X. Professor X seems to be getting a lot of heat on this list. And even though this is a what if and basically anything goes, it's just a really bizarre call to have part of the X-Men family travel through time to kill his parents and their noble mentor Charles Xavier. This naturally doesn't go unnoticed and actually starts an all-out war between the X-Men and the X-Force. And while these two groups are duking it out, Megynito takes the opportunity to take control of Washington, D.C., which segues into that second part I mentioned, aptly named What If Megynito Took Over the USA. But regardless, this just made me feel weird to see a character we're used to seeing as a hero just take a sudden turn to evil, so much to the point where he kills his own flesh and blood in a brutal massacre. And why? Well, they have some differences in ideology, but why does that matter if they're in the past? Couldn't Cable have just stayed in his own time and believed in stuff over there? Although he's not really known to stay in his own time very often. It's just that he normally does it for good instead of doing it to start a massive war that ends in Sentinels dropping nukes on Washington and killing everyone. I don't know, was it worth it, Cable? Check out the issue and see if you think.
Number 3. Elektra. Elektra makes an appearance in the 1977 What If series in issue number 34. This being a humor issue, we get to take a look at what might have happened had Elektra survived her run-in with Bullseye. Even though Elektra at this time was depicted as a villain, or, you know, at least an extremely edgy anti-hero, it seems that this one-panel take on the character has her reconsider her life of crime as a result of her near-death experience. This is pretty weird, considering I'm pretty sure at this point Elektra would have had already a few near-death experiences in her line of work as an assassin. So, like, unless she knew she was going to die here and then that's not what happened. But I feel like for her this is just an average Tuesday. Elektra even goes so far as to consider settling down and getting married. And, I quote, or something. What is or something? Also, Elektra getting married just because she didn't die from Bullseye fighting her? Wow, that just seems a little unbelievable. Anything can happen in an alternate reality.
Number 2 is Dazzler. In What If number 33, the question is asked, what if Dazzler had become the Herald of Galactus? These days, Dazzler is known to be a relatively stagnant member of the X-Men and doesn't usually get a lot of mention in the mainstream. Sorry, Amanda. Amanda really likes Dazzler. However, in the 80s, it was a totally different story. Right before this issue of What If in 1981, Dazzler is taken on by Galactus as his herald, but only to complete a quick mission to retrieve his original herald. Then she goes back home. But fast forward 1 year later to 1982, And in this what if, the situation is revisited again, but in this case, she stays as this Herald and actually becomes one of the most powerful villains in all the cosmos. The Herald of Galactus is an individual imbued with part of Galactus's power cosmic, and their job is to fly around the cosmos and look for planets for Galactus to consume. So it's a pretty big deal to be given the title of Herald, both for the one who's selected and for the people of the cosmos, because if you're doing your job right as a Herald, you'd best believe you're ruining and ending the lives of countless others. So, for Dazzler, of all the heroes to be taken in by Galactus and given this responsibility, it just leaves me with a weird feeling in my gut. Like, why would a character that barely wants to be a hero and only really wants to sing, like why would they take on the job of Herald of Galactus? The answer does lie in this issue, but it's still a bit confusing and maybe a bit out of character for Dazzler, which is why I put it at number 2.
Number 1. Susie Richards. In issue number 30 of the 1989 What If series, Susie, Reed and Sue's second child, becomes the villain. Susie is obviously meant to be a stand-in for Valeria Richards, who we have now, their daughter, who has a weird history where she was kind of both the oldest and then like the youngest child of the fantastic duo. It's confusing, but don't worry about it. In this version of the story, she is most definitely just the younger, but despite being the younger sibling between her and Franklin, she still terrifies her brother, who in the main continuity was once known for insanely powerful reality warping abilities. Although I don't think he has those in this reality. But anyways, you know you're scary when you're scaring Franklin. Even a young Franklin. Susie is an evil little girl who it turns out was possessed by a hellspawn that came from the negative zone. In the end, Franklin is forced to fight and defeat her, but unfortunately all too late, as the rest of his family has already been killed by her. Even Dr. Doom doesn't stand a chance against the possessed Susie. Poor Franklin, he warned everyone, but they didn't listen.
Number 10. Gorgon. If you remember the weirdest DC Multiverse Superheroes video, which you should check out, I talked about a pastiche of the Incredible Hulk in DC Comics called Big Baby from Earth 8. He was part of a team called the Retaliators, who were supposed to be a joke version of the Avengers. This universe also had a team of villains called the Extremists, and on that team was a Dr. Octopus type character named Gorgon. While Gorgon did utilize technological enhancements, I think his octopus likeness comes in the form of his prehensile hair. The hair tentacles he uses and his role as a scientist mixed with his weight and oddly familiar glasses all come together to really evoke a Dr. Octopus likeness, which is just weird enough to make me double take. He is also familiar enough that I can't really put him any higher on this list, so there's that. Number 9. Dexter. Or Dexter, or Dexter, or Dexter. Cats can be ruthless, cold, and scary at times, I'll admit that. But while the Red Lantern of Sector 2814, Dexter, is an irrationally rage-filled kitty, it's all because he loved his owner. Dexter's origin shows the cat Dexter with his owner when she is attacked by robbers who broke into her home. While Dexter tried his best to scratch the attacker, he ended up ending the life of Dexter's owner. When the police showed up on the scene, Dexter was kicked out into the streets so as to not contaminate the scene. Now, 2 rascals from the streets found Dexter when he was trying to sleep, put him in a sack, and threw him into a river. Now that is one hell of a sequence of events, and all this happening filled the poor little kitty with enough rage that it caught the attention of Atrocitus, who called out to him and made him a Red Lantern. With this newfound power of the Red Lantern ring, the rage kitty exacted his sweet revenge on the hoodlums and flew to say goodbye to his owner one last time, saying, in his little cat language, "I find who hurt you, I kill. I good kitty." I love this cat, but I also wouldn't dare mess with it. Ever. Number 8. Prometheus. Heroes and villains with no powers always seem to be some of the most powerful. It's strange. Take Prometheus. After seeing his criminal parents pass at the hands of police, he vows a vendetta on any form of justice. A vendetta that would push him to be able to defeat the whole Justice League single-handedly. He shot the Martian Manhunter with a dart that turned his power against him and set him on fire. He infected Steel's armor with a computer virus which commanded the suit to damage the Watchtower. He hypnotized the Huntress into unconsciousness. He attacked Green Lantern with a neural chaff that rendered his ring useless. He trapped the angel Zariel in limbo. He tricked the Flash into believing that he had planted motion-sensitive devices that would explode if the Flash used his powers. And he defeated Batman in hand-to-hand combat. That's probably the most nuts thing on this list. His origin is very similar to Batman's. After his parents were dispatched from the mortal plane, he would travel the globe training and becoming the ultimate combat machine. But he also attended the top universities, learning as much as he could. He eventually sets up a base in the Ghost Zone. And from here, he built an armor that could download information on any opponent's fighting style, kind of reminiscent of Taskmaster's ability. He is kind of crazy capable, and his vendetta on any kind of justice plus his Batman likeness just makes him kind of a little strange to me, but also terrifying. Number 7. Earth 17 Superman. On Earth 17, superheroes are a product of government experiments. The Superman of this universe, Overman, was the first, with the other superheroes being spawns of his DNA. Now that may be weird, but that ain't the weird part. He also doesn't really seem like a villain yet, does he? Well, after contracting a disease, contracting a disease from another person, yes, like that kind of disease, he goes insane and destroys the Justice League and reduces his world to rubble. He then gets his filthy paws on a doomsday boom boom that he intends to use on Earth 17 and wipe it out. The Crisis on Infinite Earths destroyed this reality, just like DC tried to destroy such a naughty Superman story, even having different iterations of Overmans who were different, like an Overman who became allied with the Axis powers in World War II. But the internet never forgets DC Comics, and people like me exist to remind everyone of the things you published into this world. I am sorry, sort of. Thanks for the content. Number 6. Mr. Mixopitalic. Look, I talked about Batmite when discussing heroes, and he wasn't even really a hero, so how can I not mention the first 5th dimensional imp in this video? Plus he's got a fun name. Mr. Mixopitalic is a reality warping imp obsessed with Superman, who, just like his rival Batmite did with Batman, simply seeks to annoy the hell out of Superman and just prove he is smarter than him. Which is good, because he has a level of power that in other hands could cause the entire end of the multiverse. More on that later though. He can do almost anything imaginable if he wishes it. And his only weakness really is being convinced or tricked into saying his name backwards to send him back to the 5th dimension, which, if you're trying to say it correctly, is honestly a superpower in and of itself. Clitopizixum. I got it. Mixopitalic.
Number 5. TwoFace. Harvey eventually became the district attorney of Gotham and became essential in the efforts to reclaim the city from its mob influence. One day in court, Dent was interrogating a mob boss by the name of Salvatore Maroni, who threw a vial of acid in Harvey's face. The acid deformed the left side of Harvey's face, and the shock of this, combined with his underlying mental health issues, caused the district attorney to become the villain TwoFace. TwoFace is obsessed with chance as well as the number 2, often committing crimes that relate to the number. He uses a 2-headed silver dollar, with one side scarred to reflect his own deformity, to determine whether or not to commit his crimes or murder his victims. Number 4. The Jester. After years of struggling, the egotistical actor was cast in a production of Cyrano de Bergerac, but his performance was not well received as he was booed by audience members and panned by critics and fired after the show's opening night. As all actors do, he eventually went insane, and with the help of the Tinkerer became the supervillain known as the Jester. He has gone on several bizarre crime sprees, such as when he used fake newscasts to convince people that JFK was alive and that the Vietnam War never occurred. He is tangled with Daredevil several times over the years, although he did retire for a time after successfully impersonating a famous actor named Benedict LaForge, and performing the role of Cyrano on TV in Daredevil number 218. Number 3. Killer Moth. When Drury Walker saw that the criminal element of Gotham City was being terrorized into submission by Batman, he realized that someone could make a lot of money by becoming the anti-Batman. Someone who the criminals could call upon in their hour of need to protect them from the Batman. Despite his best efforts, Killer Moth failed to be taken seriously as a villain, being laughed at by Gotham's underworld and being considered more of a nuisance than anything else by Batman. He is notable for being the first villain that Batgirl ever apprehended after he attempted to kidnap Bruce Wayne from a costume party where Barbara Gordon, who was dressed in a Batman-themed costume, defeated him. Number 2. Stiltman. First appearing in Daredevil number 8, Stiltman Stiltman was a scientist named Wilbur Day who stole the plans for a hydraulic ram device in order to create telescopic metal legs, which allowed him to tower over the people of New York as Stiltman. He used the power of being tall to attack the scientist Carl Caxton multiple times in hopes of stealing the scientist's shrink ray. On one of these occasions, he hoped to use the device to shrink the Golden Gate Bridge, but was defeated by Daredevil and Black Widow. Number 1. The Ventriloquist. When he was a child, Arnold Wesker's parents took him to the Gotham City shipyards to see an albatross. The bird scared Arnold, who demanded to be taken home. While walking home, his parents were run over by a truck full of display dummies. He blamed himself for this and, as a result, bottled up all of his negative emotions like anger. Years later, Arnold had a psychotic break and killed a man during a bar fight and was sent to Blackgate Prison. His cellmate had carved a ventriloquist dummy out of the tree that the prison used to hang its inmates, and Wesker eventually believed that the dummy was talking to him. He killed his cellmate and escaped with the puppet. The puppet renamed himself Scarface, and the two went into a life of crime. Wesker is of course delusional, but his unsettling skill at ventriloquism provides him with an outlet for all of his negative emotions, with the puppet taking on a brutal and psychopathic personality as well as the persona of a 20s gangster.
Number 10. Trapster. Oddly enough, although Trapster is a super weird and relatively obscure villain, he's still somehow made his way into a surprising number of comics. I mean, he has been around since the 60s, so considering that, I guess not so many, but we're still talking over 100 issues at least, which is pretty weird considering who Trapster is. Trapster is weird because, well, he was originally known as the guy who came armed with a glue gun, or a paste gun if you will. Initially he was known by the supervillain name Paste Pot Pete. However, Trapster has since come to loathe that name and much prefers to be called Trapster instead, as he feels the former name makes him sound lame and is often used out of disrespect for him. Admittedly, he is kinda lame though. Sorry Trapster, you might be a genius, but you still fight with glue. So anyone that fights with a glue gun, I'm just saying. Although I will say if it was a hot glue gun burns do hurt a lot. Number 9. Polka Dot Man. You might think you know Polka Dot Man, but do you really know him? If you've seen the Suicide Squad, you are familiar with a version of Abner Krill, but the original Polka Dot Man, also Abner Krill of the New Earth continuity, was a little bit different when it came to his power set, at least initially. Initially when Polka Dot Man, or Mr. Polka Dot, first appeared, he came armed with multiple different weapons which all came from the polka dots on his suit. He could pull them off and basically turn them into any means of different weapons and devices, even once turning one into a getaway vehicle. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to talk more weird, obscure things from comics with me, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. This list actually has everything that I love. Weird, obscure, and villains. I love all of those things. Number 8. Vanisher. Vanisher was actually one of the first villains that the X-Men came up against way back in X-Men issue number 2. In short, he was weird because he gave the X-Men so much trouble, especially considering Marvel Girl was on the team and he was only a teleporter. Though at this time they'd never encountered a teleporter before and were fairly new heroes. Also, Jean likely unknowingly had mental blocks in place. Vanisher's demise was also quite dark and odd when Professor X, who had left the X-Men to fight alone initially as a test, finally came to their aid and easily defeated Vanisher by making him forget who he was, which honestly is a pretty horrifying punishment. Don't worry though, that wouldn't be the end of Vanisher, and he'd also end up getting a much less extravagant costume. Which actually is kinda sad. I do like his original costume, with its whole thing. It's very red and patterned. Number 7. Crazy Quilt. Crazy Quilt actually might sound familiar to you in terms of his overall personality and demeanor, as it seems like the version of Polka Dot Man that we saw in the Suicide Squad, to me at least, is actually closer to a combination of the original Polka Dot Man mixed with, well, this villain, Crazy Quilt. Crazy Quilt was Paul Decker, a painter and criminal who left clues in his artwork as to his criminal plots. Eventually he was apprehended, left blinded by a gunshot wound in the scuffle. He would regain his sight through an experimental procedure where his optic nerves were attached to a helmet, but the blinding colors that he would see would cause him to go insane. At least when I was watching the Suicide Squad, I was like, this Polka Dot Man kinda reminds me of Polka Dot Man mixed with Crazy Quilt, cause he's so crazy. Number 6. Unus the Untouchable. Another villain who almost foiled the X-Men in their early days was Unus. Unus the Untouchable was a mutant who couldn't be touched by those who would do harm to him, making him seemingly invincible when he first came up against the X-Men in issue 8. His power was also weirdly specific, as it didn't repel all things from him, and mainly seemed to target those who fought against him and projectiles that would do him harm. Beast was the one to help defeat him when he learned of his true nature in a wrestling match against him. This was during a brief moment when Hank McCoy left the team. When Unus turned to a life of crime, Beast was the one to stop him by creating a device that intensified his power, causing everything to be repelled from Unus, including food. Starving, Unus eventually agreed to stay on the straight and narrow, and Beast returned his power levels to how they once were, allowing Unus to return to his wrestling career. Number 5. Space Admiral von Strucker. In the What If story from issue number 14 of the 1977 series, we answer the question, what if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? Turns out that events would be, as expected, pretty weird. The whole premise is that on this alternate Earth, humans got to space a lot sooner and ended up being pulled into a conflict where they fought against the Baytans. Strucker himself was an admiral. Strucker would end up on the side of humanity, but would ultimately betray humankind and Earth to ally himself with the Baytans. He saw an opportunity for Germany, who he was more loyal to than, just Earth in general, even though, Germany's part of Earth, so I feel like maybe an interesting choice on his part. Basically, he believed that if the Baytans took over as their allies, Germany would be in a better place than they were now, so he decided to betray his fellow space soldiers, which actually I guess kinda does make sense considering everything that happened after World War I. Space wars are always fun and weird though, and this story and its antagonists are, of course, no exception. Number 4. Hypnofish. The Hypnofish that appears in What If issue number 1 from the 1977 series is actually a character that has appeared in the main continuity. A character? A type of fish? Whether there is only a single Hypnofish or more than one. This is a character who has only made a few appearances in even the main continuity since their first 616 appearance in 1963 in Fantastic Four issue number 14. But they also appear as Namor the Submariner's villainous ally in the first What If issue, where we answer the question, what if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? The end result is that Namor successfully uses his Hypnofish friend to kidnap Sue Storm, but instead of being rescued as she was in issue number 14 of FF, she ends up staying with Namor and ultimately becoming his queen, all because Spider-Man is on the team, which leaves her kind of feeling like isolated from them. In the end, his Hypnofish and Mentofish plot is successful, and Sue chooses to remain with Namor. Also, yes, there are also Mentofish. That's a thing too. An even more rare thing than Hypnofish, I believe. Number 3. Loki, Prince of Jotunheim. Another one of my favorite episodes from Marvel's and Disney Plus's What If series, for just how lighthearted and adorable it was one that asked the question, what if Thor were an only child? The answer was that Thor would basically be kind of a well-loved brat who was obsessed with partying as opposed to heroics. Not only did we get Party Thor in this episode though, we also got friendly frost giant Loki, who is also known of course as the Prince of Jotunheim. Instead of Loki being adopted by Odin and growing up to be the villain we normally know him as, the sort of jealous and vengeful brother of Thor, he becomes Thor's best friend and ally, who also seems to enjoy a good party. And I gotta say, I kinda love it. Super weird and super great. Number 2. Galactus. Galactus is a pretty complex character. Sometimes he's a villain, at times he's been a hero. Currently, I'm pretty sure in the main continuity he's dead and his corpse is maybe being used as part of Thor's throne room, but either way, when it comes down to it, despite being a cosmic inevitability, Galactus often threatens entire worlds with his hunger, which, it feels pretty villainous. And yet even he can end up with a happy ending where he gets to enjoy the simple life. All it takes is for Thanos to use the Infinity Gauntlet to wipe his mind and send him to Earth to live as a human. Hey, it's so easy. In this story, this attempt to neutralize Galactus results in him being recognized, despite his amnesia, as Elvis. This is because Galen in his human form happens to sound and look just like Elvis, coincidentally. When Adam Warlock finds him after defeating Thanos and offers to return Galactus to his prior form and power, he actually refuses and decides to live out his days on Earth with his new partner Gertrude and her son, basically filling in as the planet's, Elvis replacement following the mysterious death of the real Elvis. Which, fair enough. If I came to Earth and then people thought I was Elvis, I'd probably be like, you know what, I think I'm good, I'll just chill here, this is a pretty good life. Number 1. Juggernaut. In this bizarre What If issue, we ask the question, what if Professor X of the X-Men had become the Juggernaut, which is A strange question, and is also a great question. Obviously, instead of his brother Cain Marco. Obviously, who is normally the Juggernaut. This story takes place in the pages of issue 13 of the 1989 What If series. Here we see that Professor X is trapped under the rubble of the caved-in tomb where Cyttorak's gem awaited an avatar. So Charles becomes the avatar of Cyttorak and not only gains great physical power, but has his psychic mutant power basically increased as well. Because he was not around to form the X-Men, the Fantastic Four fight against Megynito in their place, which causes anti-mutant hysteria as a result. In response, when Juggernaut surfaces, he creates his own team of mutants to enforce anti-human laws in response. Woo! Becoming a powerful villain as opposed to friend and ally of humankind. Would have gone a lot differently.